Also, a list of significant events and terms that you will need to know for the exam, some of which are on the study guide. As I've said before, I'm not real big on exact dates in my classes because I feel like that's the sort of thing that everyone can check pretty quickly. It's at our fingertips. The important thing is to know what happened and why it happened and around when it happened. So generally, if someone comes close, I'm okay with that. But these two dates in particular, I do want you to remember, not just for an exam, but henceforth, if you did not already know them. The attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, and the beginning of the invasion of Normandy by the Allies on D-Day, which was June the 6th, 1944. Also, the German term Blitzkrieg, which literally means lightning war, which was the German tactic of rolling in really fast before the opponent knows what hit them. And if you're a football fan, you'll know that this kind of got shortened to Blitz, or lightning, for when everybody rushes the quarterback all at once. Blitz also shows up in the London Blitz, which was the German Air Force attack on London that actually lasted. It started in 1940 and it lasted for a very long time, in which the Royal Air Force of Great Britain was trying to defend the skies from German fighters and bombers, and those bombers were just bombing the crap out of London and also other industrial cities. Another term to know, carpet bombing. Carpet bombing is when you're dropping bombs on a city, but not trying to just take out military or industrial targets. It's bombing everything, basically covering the entire area like you were covering it with a carpet. And the reasoning behind this, two main reasons really. Number one is to dishearten the enemy by killing so many civilians that you make them lose the will to resist. The second reason is, the main goal of these bombings was to destroy factories that are producing war material for your enemy. Well, you can destroy the factories, but if you also destroy all the workers in their homes, in the cities where the factories are, that works even better. This is something that the Germans did in Warsaw when they had that Blitzkrieg in September 1939 of Poland. They did it in Rotterdam in the Netherlands when they conquered the Netherlands. But it was not only the Germans who used this tactic. The Allies used this tactic as well. A lot of sorties were flown over German cities, such as Cologne, other industrial cities, Hamburg, and Dresden in particular was targeted for massive carpet bombing, resulting in the virtual destruction of that city and the deaths of many, many civilians. And the U.S. Army Air Corps practiced this tactic on Tokyo, starting early in the war, right? The American forces had not advanced close enough to take the land forces of Japan, but starting early on, launching from China, American planes were flying over Tokyo and other Japanese cities and carpet bombing them. This is something that most folks don't think about. But, spoiler alert, there's going to be 2 atomic bombs that we're going to talk about later, dropped on Japan. There were more civilians killed in the carpet bombing of Tokyo than were killed in the atomic bombs, which is not in any way to lessen, the significance of the atomic bombs. But this is a lot of loss of civilian life. Now, all this was kind of a new thing. It had been done to a lesser extent shortly before this during the Spanish Civil War by German planes at places where they knew there were Spanish Republican fighters. But it was well, it was also practiced throughout the 50s and 60s in various wars, but it was banned by the Geneva Convention in 1977 and is now considered a war crime, no matter who does it. The London Blitz had a huge impact, no pun intended, obviously on the people living in London during World War II. But actually, it had an impact and it had echoes culturally that spread far beyond that stuff that probably you've never really stopped and thought about. Which brings us to a little bit of the cultural stuff I'm going to be talking about for a while now. Here we have a couple of different rock and roll concept albums from the 1970s by two very influential rock bands who got their start in the 1960s. Concept albums tell one whole story. Okay, so first we've got Tommy by the rock group The Who, a British group, which is maybe if you've ever heard the song Pinball Wizard, maybe you have. It comes from this album, which was came out in late 1969, was made into a movie in 1975, and is essentially about a deaf, mute, and blind young man whose issues are psychological as he has to work through a bunch of things. And there's also the album The Wall that came out in 1979, 1980 by Pink Floyd, another British rock group. And it tells the story of the fictionalized but based on a real member of the band back in the 60s character of Pink, who is a rock star who also has a lot of emotional and mental problems that cause him to create a wall between himself and the rest of the world. Well, these albums have to do with World War II. The people who wrote these songs and performed these songs were in their 20s in the 1960s, which means they were little kids in the 1940s during the war. So Tommy features at the very beginning kind of the story of Tommy's parents. His father was a Royal Air Force captain, a pilot who gets lost fighting against the Nazis during the London Blitz. Although no spoilers, that's not what really happened, but that's how the story starts. And then The Wall, which I'm assuming some of you at least are familiar with. You know, early on, you've got the little boy saying, "Look, Mummy, there's an aeroplane up in the sky." And then you have the famous song, Another Brick in the Wall, of which there are three different versions, three refrains, if you will. And one of them says, "Daddy's gone across the ocean, nothing left but a memory, a snapshot in the family album. Daddy, what did you leave behind for me?" And it's the same story. His father was a Royal Air Force pilot. Maybe he wasn't a pilot. Maybe he was a soldier. Anyway, his father had been killed in World War II, and he was raised by his very smothering and neurotic mother. But the point is that the experience that Roger Waters had from Pink Floyd, Pete Townsend from the Who, the experiences they had as kids really informed kind of the issues that they faced as adults, and that they wrote and performed about, and which became a huge part of American popular culture, really the world's popular culture. Perhaps you are familiar with this story, this children's book that has been made into an animated film back in the 70s, and more recently a live action film, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If you are familiar with it, and I'm assuming several of you probably are, then you'll know that the story starts with these children being sent away out into the country to live in this big mansion way out in the countryside, owned by a professor. Well, why were they sent away? The story is set in 1940, and they were sent away from London because of the Blitz by their parents to go and live with the professor where they would be safe. Of course, if you're familiar with the story, you know that that particular professor's house is not as safe as they thought. You got to watch those professors. But that was a common thing during the Blitz for people who lived in major cities to send their children away where they'd be safe. Well, why didn't the whole family leave? That's because the adults were needed in the city. For one thing, someone had to put out the fires and rescue the people when the bombs fell. But for another thing, someone had to be working in the factories to support the war effort for ultimate victory. So this is another example of the London Blitz kind of echoing across all kinds of unexpected types of popular culture.